sometimes I wonder, am I too shallow? Because I think, then maybe I'm just writing about what's very obvious and a cliche. But I think most people do like to remember the times when they weren't sure of everything and confident. I was fairly confident about everything because I had such kind parents who told us we were wonderful, and the four of us thought we were wonderful because our parents never stopped telling us that. But I mean, obviously I used to come and glance at myself in the mirror or see myself reflected in a shop window and think, hey, you don't look great. But I thought it didn't matter all that much, so I was able to get through with it all right. But I've had low feelings. So I often write about these kind of low feelings where people feel inadequate or unable to cope. And I think people like to do that. They they recognize it and they see themselves in the things. Because once when I was working in the Irish Times, at the last moment, something happened and somebody didn't deliver their article in time. And so I had suddenly, at the very last moment, I had to fill 600 words, just at the very last moment, and they were waiting for it. So I had to type it myself, and I just thought, what will I write? Well, I've done no research. And I wrote about the first time I ever went to stay in a hotel. And the first time I ever stayed in a hotel, I didn't know whether you made the bed or not. Because you see, when we were young, we never stayed in a hotel. To be such a thing, children nowadays, it wouldn't be such a big deal for them. But in our youth, it was a huge excitement. Different kind of people stayed in a hotel. Very rich people stayed in a hotel, we thought. So when I was 19 and I stayed in a hotel in London for the first time, I just didn't know what you did. And I thought, suppose I don't make the bed, and I come home, the whole hotel could be assembled on the step asking me to leave. And suppose I did make the bed and you weren't meant to make it, maybe they would think I wasn't worthy to stay in a hotel and they'd ask me to leave anyway. So I just sort of flattened it all out and straightened it up as much as I could. And I wrote this very quickly for the paper, and I appeared in the Irish Times the next day. And I got hundreds of letters from people saying that they'd all felt exactly the same. They've all felt exactly the same. And some of them wrote back to me and said, I still don't know, do you make the bed or do you not? So I was delighted to discover that in humans there's a little bit of feebleness sometimes and not being sure of the situation, which they like to recognize in other situations.
Now, getting back to your new movie, Maeve, How About You? Do you think that there is a way to get people who have suffered from tragedy in life to sort of live again?
Well, I don't know. I think it has to come from them, really, in a sense. I don't think you could actually frighten them into it like Hayley Atwell does in this movie when she loses her temper and shouts at them. And suddenly they panic because nobody's ever spoken to them in that way before. Normally people have just taken their fees for the hotel and been nice to them, even despite their great rudeness and their lack of tolerance. I don't know what you do to try and make people. There are people in the world that you can't, who will never count their blessings. They will look and see the glass is very, very empty rather than full. And I suppose it would be real wisdom and maturity to know if you can't change them. But I never stop trying to change them. In all of my books, people are not transformed physically. They're not they don't become beautiful, or they don't become rich, or they don't necessarily get married and some marvelous man comes in to rescue them. None of those things, because I've seen a lot of married, rich, beautiful people who are very unhappy. So that's not what brings you happiness. What brings you happiness, I think, is playing the hand that you're dealt, and I think that's as good a way as any. But if you don't know it, it'll often mean you'll have to accidentally discover it yourself. And maybe this movie might do it for people. You might see the discontented faces of all these four people in the home, snorting at each other, demanding their own little tables, having little petty triumphs, or getting by on a day of petty triumphs, compared to the absolute fantastic abandoned joy of when they let themselves go, and the kind of matiness and how everything is transformed. And maybe inside in people's heart a little something might fall, and that they would stop consoling themselves with false pride.
And the whole transformation creeps up on them too. They don't seem to realise that they are transforming until it's, well, gladly too late, really, don't they?
Well, this is true, and I think one of the things that's really very nice is this is much better in the movie than it is in in the short stories. In the short stories, there wasn't time for this. But this very nice woman called Jean Pasley wrote the screen treatment. She did a very, very good job on it. And she spent quite a lot of time talking about this Christmas dinner that they cooked. Now, more than I did in the short story, and I thought that was so good because you just moved around from face to face, and you suddenly saw in all of their faces the happiness that could have been there, and the happiness of past days when they weren't all pursed up like prunes and not talking to each other and not talking to anybody else, and talking about their early childhood and the grand roots and origins they came from. It just came gradually in the end, and then suddenly they were out in the snow, and they were sitting in the back of a battered car driving around place, and they were having a great time. And as one person said to me after the film was shown in Dublin, she said, "I'm looking for that hotel. I want to go and stay in it now. I'd like to spend the rest of my days there. Does it exist?" And I said, no, it's all part of the fertile imagination, I'm afraid.
Movies these days, Maeve, don't seem to have meaningful stories like this one. Why is that, do you think? Why do you think stories like How About You so rarely reach the big screen these days?
Well, there aren't many stories like that in a sense, because I think people who make movies and have blockbusters often think that people want hugely descriptive sexual books, or they want lots and lots of violence, or they want lots of special effects in the movies. Now, I don't know about these things. I mean, I know a bit about sex, not enough. Which of us ever knows enough about sex? But I'd be afraid I'd get it wrong if I started writing about it, and people would laugh at me. So I don't write about sex. Anyway, I'm a bit embarrassed, and I only write as I talk. I write exactly as I talk, and so I don't sit down and talk to people about sex all the time, and so therefore there's no point. So I can't make up those conversations. And then secondly, I have no idea what all these marvelous space gadgets would be. I wouldn't know how to write them, or car crashes or anything, and I wouldn't. I don't really like to write about hateful bank developments and people trying to take over big businesses. These are not the things I know about. The things I know about really are hopes and dreams, and this idea that if you think very often, if you think if you're good, you'll be happy, and that's not always true. And then it seems very bewildering. You say, "Well, I was good. Why aren't I happy?" And I think so. I just try to write about what I see all around me, and to my great pleasure, people seem to like it.
Now, the character Georgia is an ageing actress with a bit of a drinking problem, and you once said yourself, Maeve, that you wanted to be famous, and here we have this character in your story who was once famous herself, but has lost it all. But Georgia seems to come to terms...
I mean, it was a very shallow wish of mine to want to be famous. When they at school, they were asking us what we wanted to do, and I said I'd like to be famous. I was about 14 at the time, in my green school uniform, and I couldn't bear doing the same thing every day. I wanted to be well known, and I suppose it was just a child looking for attention, really, at that stage. And I think a lot of people, if they were honest, would admit that they'd like to be famous for a while. And Georgia couldn't bear in the story. She couldn't bear to think that her day was gone, her day was over. And I used to think, always thought, I mean, when I started writing when I was in my early 40s, and I looked around me, and I used to think that the happiest older people I knew were the ones who got pleasure out of their memories, not the ones who say, "Oh, when I think what I was able to do when I was young." And I always hoped that I would be, when I got to be old, that I would take great pleasure in the things that I did, rather than being wistful that I couldn't do them anymore. And I have, fortunate enough, been able to do that. My health is not as great as it should be, and so I'm not able to do as much travelling. I used to do an awful lot of travelling, but instead of whining and saying, why can't I do more travel, I just think to myself, aren't I very, very lucky that I saw so much of the world when I was young? And I'm always encouraging people, when your children are young, let them out, send them off, send them right away. The Chinese have a proverb that says, if you love your child, send him on a journey. And I think that if I had children, I would have sent them to all ends of the earth so that they've seen everything. And then it would definitely make their lives happier to have seen so much rather than just seen the place they were in. And secondly, that if the day came when they couldn't travel, they have an awful lot of good memories to look back on.
Live from New York City, RadioIrish.com.